Welcome to the third edition of On the Record. 4 Canadian nurses are about to show you their faces and tell you their stories of being bullied and harassed for years. Their experiences are going to resonate with many nurses around the world, male and female. We know it because we hear the stories. I'm glad that we can share them with you today. It takes courage and it takes a lot of strength to expose themselves. It's not easy, and it sometimes feels unsafe. Actually, it is unsafe. One of these nurses is going to say to you, as you're listening, that they were scared to lose their house. Well, I know of a nurse who did lose their home fighting for what was right. When you're listening to these stories, I want you to think about the fact that this could be your wife or your husband, your mother, your sister, your brother, your daughter, or your son one day. When you look at the statistics, the odds are pretty high. Please listen, please talk about it, and please share.
Hi, I'm Shannon, and until 2019, I was a registered nurse. I took great pride in my work, excelling clinically and academically. I was well liked and respected, and over the course of my career, provided compassionate, ethical, quality care to thousands of Canadians living in Manitoba, British Columbia, and Nunavut. Like many others, including many of you, I experienced trauma and abuse in childhood. I dropped out of high school at an early age and had to fend for myself. Despite these challenges, I eventually graduated with a diploma, followed by a nursing degree with distinction. I worked for many years at a large inner city hospital where I experienced personal and professional tragedy. In just 4 years, 3 individuals linked to my workplace died by suicide. 2 were registered nurses, 2 were beloved family members. These events made a powerful impact on me, and I eventually left the hospital for the community in 2004, convinced that environment had to be safer, physically and psychologically. I could not have been more wrong. My experiences ran the gamut from threats of physical violence to sexual harassment to psychological violence in the form of bullying and intimidation by colleagues. I'll never forget the day a male colleague referred to me as a C word in the presence of other colleagues. Another confronted me in an exam room, positioning himself between me and the exit, visibly angry because I dared decline a shift change. I was 50 years old and had been exposed to workplace violence and trauma for 20 years as a nurse, and for many more years prior to entering the profession, when I finally formally exercised my right to work in a safe, healthy, and respectful environment. I refused to be gaslighted. I knew what bullying and harassment were. I followed policy and procedure. I reviewed literature from the Canadian Nurses Association, the Canadian Federation of Nurses Unions, the Canadian Protective Society. I even consulted with practice consultants at my own provincial regulator, the College of Registered Nurses Manitoba. I did all the right things. What I've learned is you can do all the right things and still end up with the wrong outcome. The message I received was very clear. Don't report, don't question, don't complain. I took my professional and ethical obligations seriously, and silence was never an option for me. I was entitled to a safe, healthy, and respectful workplace. So are you. I turned 60 in February, and I'm often asked how I've persevered, especially when we've suffered many personal losses and tragedies in the last 10 years. It would have been impossible without the support of family and close friends. Key to my healing has been educating myself, but even more importantly, by sharing that knowledge with others. I've connected with many survivors over the years, sharing information and resources, accompanying them to meetings and hearings as a support person and note taker. I cannot understate how important it is to understand that consent that's been coerced or given under duress is neither voluntary nor is it informed. That applies to agreements and assessments. Always bring a support person with you. Bring a note taker to meetings with you. If you're summoned to a meeting, always ask in advance what the agenda is and who's going to be there. Get everything in writing. Ask for identification. Document carefully and keep that information safely secured. You never know what's going to be important one day. never signed anything on the spot, and certainly without seeking independent legal advice. And union lawyers are not independent. Their client is the union. Their client isn't you. Had I known 10 years ago what I know now, I could have better protected myself and my family. But you can't know what you don't know. And I've learned valuable lessons along the way. I may have left the profession, but I'm more determined than ever to ensure that others benefit and are empowered by my journey and my experiences. We are so much stronger than we ever imagined. We are stronger together. There's always hope. You're not alone.
My name's Laura Marie Fougere. In 2013, I was the nurse in good standing with my nurse regulator, College of Licensed Practical Nurses of Manitoba, for 21 years, with great performance reviews for my employer, the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority. I became a Manitoba Nurses Union health and safety rep because of the ongoing harassment on my unit and within my local. It was making me and many of my colleagues really ill, many requiring stress leave, counseling, treatment, and medication. It was also causing severe nursing shortages, which is compromising patient care. When we tried to follow the reporting procedures, as is our duty as nurses, their harassment, retaliation, and defamation continued and became much worse. We lost half of our nursing unit, 25 out of 50 nurses, due to the toxic work environment. Eventually, I developed generalized anxiety disorder and profound depression due to the trauma. My doctor ordered me never to work for the WRHA again. The WRHA disregarded my doctor's advice and tried forcing me back to work, and then I filed a right to refuse unsafe work. The WRHA fired me while I was on medical leave after filing the right to refuse unsafe work. Obviously, nurses can't work when they're profoundly traumatized, depressed, and anxious. They hired me back on unpaid leave a year later under the false pretense it was going to be a grievance investigation procedure, which I was thrilled to pieces because I was being defamed and there was no evidence of wrongdoing or misconduct or incompetence. But it wasn't a grievance investigation procedure. It was a forced, coerced, non-disclosure agreement signing. And so I got a small amount of money and I signed it because I wanted a letter of reference. I was trying to get a job as a nurse and couldn't get one because of the defamation. And the employer was insisting, had to do all these things like to babysit me, even though I did nothing wrong. I had started multiple legal proceedings to fight this, including formal complaints, besides what I had already done, filing complaints, harassment complaints, and right to refuse, but also human rights complaints, the Public Interest Law Center, Ombudsman's Office, you name it. I did everything I possibly could. We even went to the police, because of the seriousness of the issues and the effect it was having on patients and harm on patients. I ended up getting convicted, actually, in the Court of Queen's Bench, which is an unbelievable experience. Convicted for filing my right to refuse unsafe work. It was actually not part of the illegal agreement I signed, but I guess it was lumped in there or whatever. I continue to be openly defamed in court, specifically that I had abandoned my shifts while I was a nurse, but I didn't abandon my shifts. I was sick and on medical leave. So that is an open court record by a judge who did not report his decision. And I continue to keep fighting.
So my name's Tammy Dunnett, and I came to nursing a little bit later in life. I was 36 when I joined the profession, and at 38, I found myself entangled with a supervisor who I later knew to become a bully. And I didn't know at first, and I think this is common in many experiences, I thought I just had a bad boss. So we had a change in supervision, and her method of leadership was very different than the leader before. And prior to her arrival, I was written up as someone who would advance ahead of their peers. Under her leadership, my annual reviews continued to dwindle to the point where I was basically at the bottom of the barrel, flipping the bird off to our commanding officer. And the only thing that had changed was my supervisor. My work ethic was still strong. My knowledge, my clinical skill set was still strong. And so I found myself struggling to navigate an untrained leader. And I thought I could do that myself with my wise years of experience. So I spent the next couple of years trying to teach her how to treat me. Now, our first experience should have been my first tip off, because as she laid out her plan for the year for me, it was beautiful. And I had a few suggestions. And in those suggestions, I realized it was a dictatorship and not a conversation. And then the next morning, she came in and threatened me. I should share this was in the military. So the next morning, she came in, she wanted to charge me with insubordination for having ideas around my own career. Now, I'm a pretty assertive communicator, and I think this is sometimes where we find ourselves in trouble. And so I kind of met her at that challenge, and I just said, bring it. I'd like to see this stick, because I knew there was no basis to this. And I thought that was really the end of it, to be honest. But then for the next 2 years, we were just entangled in this right fighting kind of way of being. We get 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. But it wasn't until year 2 that I actually found out she was a bully. And it's kind of embarrassing to say that I didn't know the signs. But now looking back, there were so many signs, and I should have reached for help sooner. But one day I was sitting in the coffee room, and a colleague said to me, I'm really glad I got to know you. And I'm like, cool. I'm glad I got to know you too. But there was something in me that said that's kind of a weird thing to say. And that's when she disclosed that she was warned to watch her back around me when she first came to our office. That was the day I knew I had a bully and not just a bad boss. So I did what most of us do. I got louder, I got stronger, and I fought harder with the same tools I had before. And they weren't working because I didn't know anything different. And like many, I was asking for support, and I was doing all the things that I thought was the right thing to do. As a nurse, I was horrified to learn that our patients were just given medications to keep them numb to stay in a workplace that was harming them. And I felt that there had to be something better. I knew that the answers didn't exist in stress leave and medications. And while they're great for the peripheral and for that supportive system that we need, it wasn't the answer to the bullying situation I was encountering. I needed an interpersonal solution because the problem was between me and this person. And despite all of the people that I asked, and in the military, the healthcare providers are my colleagues, and they all told me their hands were tied, that none of them could actually influence and get the commanding officer to have a conversation with me to support me. And I was just asking for guidance. So long story short, as I continued to fight, I didn't recognize I was getting sick. And I think this is also very common. I started to have anxiety. I was afraid to see her in the building. And then I was afraid to see her car in the parking lot. I was afraid to drive down the street. And ultimately, I was afraid to leave my home. And it wasn't until I surrendered and I stopped fighting 4 years later that I actually started to focus on me. I was so busy trying to force her to see my value, to make her change, that I couldn't look inward and see what I was doing, that I could have found a power in a different way. And that's what motivates me now to help others find their words, to have conversations so they never get to this place. I've already been there. I've got the t-shirt. Nobody needs to live afraid of leaving their home or answering their phone or looking on their computer because their harasser might be there. So my mission in life is to change the way relationship is done, one conversation at a time, to help put the power back into your hands so that you can address the inappropriate, offensive workplace behaviors without risking the relationship, because there are safer ways to navigate these challenges in the workplace.
I'm Sandy, and I became a registered nurse in 1987. When I graduated, I was 22, and I was all brown-eyed and bushy-tailed at the career prospect of working as a nurse. I had always wanted to just help people. It was something I was always very passionate about, helping people, even since I was a child. And so I went in a little green, but nevertheless, I have to say that I saw bullying and harassment even during my training as a young student nurse, particularly with the physicians. I'd like to say it wasn't so, but there was a lot of sexual harassment. And I witnessed other sexual harassment of other nurses, and I found that very disturbing. But you kind of got the sense that, well, it's just part of the culture. So you just keep going and you think, well, it'll be okay. I got hired directly from being a student nurse from the floor I was working on. It was a general medicine floor. And so it was an easy segue to go from being a student nurse to having my first job on the same floor, which I thought was great because I knew most of the staff and I was familiar with the floor in the hospital. I didn't really have a huge learning curve in terms of getting used to that particular hospital. However, I soon discovered within just a few months that my nurse manager was a bully. And I don't know why, but she seemed to like picking on me in particular. I was teased by some of the older nurses about how I was doing things. They would say things like, oh, you young grads or you new grads think you know everything. And I thought, I know I'm doing everything textbook and I am not making any errors. I had not gotten in any trouble. There were no complaints. I was a bit confounded by some of their bullying. And I have to say it shook me up as a young nurse because I hadn't quite gotten my stride yet as an RN, nor was feeling particularly confident yet in my role. But my nurse manager in particular, I'd have to say she was the worst case of bullying. She would do some strange things like call me at 7 o'clock in the morning and say, why aren't you here? And I would think, well, that's odd. I'm not scheduled. She said, no, you are scheduled. You better come in. And I thought, okay, that's strange. Now you have to remember at this point in time in nursing, we didn't have computers yet at the nursing station. Everything was done pen and paper, or in her case, pencil and paper, so that she could erase things and rewrite things like the schedule. The first time it happened, I didn't think much about it. I thought, okay, I made a mistake. I was supposed to be at work. I would go into work. Sometimes she would ask me to do a double shift, which I didn't appreciate. But being young and somewhat naive still to the culture and to her for sure, I would comply. But after several times of being called very early in the morning as to why I wasn't at work, pardon me, started to catch on that something wasn't right. So I made sure I wrote the schedule correctly. And the next time she did that to me, I declined. I said, I'm sorry, but I know I'm not scheduled, so I'm not coming in. Well, she didn't like that, of course, and she seemed to bully me even more. When I tried to talk to her about it, she would just get very angry and, in fact, yell at me in front of other staff at times, which obviously wasn't pleasant and led to a significant amount of anxiety for me as a young nurse who was still getting her bearings in her career. And I wasn't sure that I had any recourse in dealing with her. She did many other things, bully things. Mostly she was just generally mean and always very angry and unapproachable. So over time, I decided I can't work like this. I had developed irritable bowel syndrome by that point, and I decided to talk to a colleague of mine who was closer to my age, and I said, you know, are you having this experience as well? And they would tell me things like, well, that's just how she is. You have to just get used to it. And I thought, I'm already feeling sick working here. I don't want to get used to this. And in fact, I thought, no, I am a person of integrity and I expect to be treated with respect when I come to work as much as I want to respect my superiors. So I took the brave step of going above her head. I went to her superiors without telling anybody, and it was very scary, but I was well received. I'd like to say I was well received, and I filed a complaint against her. I guess that made it back to her, and she was being investigated at that time. It was very scary to go to work at that point in time and face her and her increasing wrath. And she would threaten me saying, if you leave, I will never give you a good recommendation, things like that. She'd have little fits. So I made the decision to leave hospital nursing at that point. I really couldn't take it. And I thought, surely this can't be normal in nursing to work in these kind of circumstances. And I just want to say, I was very young. And I think a lot of young or even just new grads, no matter their age, feel quite threatened in that kind of situation. And if you're not equipped, or if you haven't been educated on it, you really, it just scares you to the point where you feel so alone and I can't change this. I can't do anything about it. They have too much power over me. So I was courageous. I did go over her head and complain. But in the meantime, I did tender my resignation and I left. Unknown to me, I bumped into a colleague sometime after I had left the hospital. And she came running out to me and she said, "Oh, you should have hung in there. They fired her." And I was pleasantly surprised. And so for me, in my case, justice was done and the bully was fired from the hospital. But I had left at that point. So I did go into community care nursing for a short time, which was much better for me. But during that period of time, I was also experiencing domestic violence, which felt similar to the kind of bullying I was facing at work. So I had the double whammy of going to a toxic workplace and a toxic home life. Because of my personal experience, I have just become very passionate about standing up for what's right, for justice. The College of Nurses of Ontario has a code of conduct in which point 4 is treating each other with respect as nurses. And I didn't see a lot of that. I mean, for sure, there were good nurses. I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. But when you see a toxic workplace as a nurse, and you feel like they're telling you, you know, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, or if you can't beat them, join them. I thought, no, I can't do that. I don't ever want to become like you. But I just felt very alone, and it was hard. And being really young and inexperienced left me, I think, an easy target for being bullied. So I think education and awareness are key. I did need to go to counseling and get help that way for my anxiety issues, which did take a toll on me in tandem with the domestic violence I was experiencing. So for me now, my aim is to help equip women in particular, because that's my own experience, to be able to recognize what bullying is, what gaslighting is. You know, when I was being told to come into work, when I knew I wasn't scheduled, I was being gaslit, but I didn't know what that was at the time. So for me, my story was, I got out and I swore I would never go back to hospital nursing as a result, which is such a shame. I felt that I had proven myself as a nurse because I was doing palliative care and was demonstrating compassion. I had a lot of good reviews with patients and their families. But the bullying from my nurse manager in particular just made it really hard to want to go to work. And I knew it was bad when I get up in the morning and just feel like I don't want to go to work. It took that much of a toll. So my story might be short, but the intensity of the bullying and the gaslighting was very intense to the point that I opted out of hospital nursing and went into community care, where things were much better for me. But I want to say that there is a recourse. You can report your bullying. Hopefully you're received. I'm hearing too many stories of people not being well received. I think if you're being bullied, you should at least try. Make sure you're documenting everything. It's extremely important. Otherwise, you have to leave. It's sad to say it, but I think the burnout rate is just way too high for nurses, and it stems from leadership, toxic leadership. It's top down. And if we can't fix the leadership, I'm afraid the people in the trenches doing the healthcare don't have much option for change. So that's why I want to speak up, because I do believe that nursing is still an admirable profession. But we've got to support nurses. We really do have to work in an atmosphere of respect, mutual respect, even though we might have differences. We should be able to speak freely about the things that are bothering us with our workplace, that we will be heard, because that's so important, and that there will be follow-up and change.
Well, now you've heard the stories, and I promise you there are millions more. Is it not hard to imagine nurses that are trying to take care of our loved ones, save lives, heal injuries and disease, and at the coffee break and lunch break or before entering the workplace, they're worried about being embarrassed or humiliated or yelled at or sabotaged in between all of what they're trying to do to stay focused and do a good job? Somebody is bullying and harassing them or sexually harassing them on the job. We have to take this seriously. We have to do something about this. We all can do something about this. Talk about it. Share about it. Share this video. Use this video in your training. It's available for you. Make sure that you reach out to new employees, new nurses, new graduates, and tell them about their rights, about their policies and procedures, that this is happening out there so that they're prepared and that they're not shocked and side-blinded like many, many male and female nurses have been before. I also want to remind you to, yes, document. Take the tips that Tammy and Shannon and Laura and Sandy have offered you. They've offered you some very good tips. The app that Joangel has created, the Trael App, mobile app, is fantastic because you're going to need evidence. But we all need to step up and speak up and do something to make this stop so that our nurses can just do the jobs that they love, helping our family members.
Hi, my name is Joangel Concepcion. I'm the founder of Trael mobile app, but I'm also a toxic workplace bullying survivor. You just heard from 4 brave nurses about their experiences with workplace bullying and harassment. If there's anything that we can learn from their stories, it's the importance of documenting your experiences. With the Trael app, you can keep track of bullying, harassment, discrimination, racism, or any unwanted behavior in the workplace, all while monitoring your overall wellness. It's a private, secure place to log your thoughts daily, upload supporting images and documents, and keep track of your mental health with custom emojis. You can then export your report and assess your input, or take it to a legal or medical expert for review. If you're experiencing unwanted behavior, please know that you're not alone and that there's help right at your fingertips. Visit traelapp.com to download the app and begin documenting your experiences today.